Alright guys, let's make bases for a complete army. Welcome guys to the Bear and the Brush, and today we are building 48 bases for the Grimsby Great Escape Dice Factory army that I'm making. But first we gotta check out what bases we are working with. There are a lot of bases: 40mm, 32mm, 25, 90, for all the different units, captains, lieutenants, dreadnoughts, motorcycles and whatnot. Oh yeah, and I forgot the tank thingy and the flyers. And of course I gotta show you my favorite new tool. Yes, this is a hobby knife, but it's a bit different. I found a hobby knife set with different blades, and these are especially useful for removing stuff. Okay, this time my journey started out a little bit different, because I looked at actual pictures from the place where this is all going to end up. That's Grimsby in the UK. Next to pictures of Sacha Baron Cohen, I found a lot of good inspiration just doing a Google picture search. They have beaches or a dock, there's a lot of buildings, old streets, rugged streets, and I kind of wanted to put this into a 40k ruined city perspective. So let's get on with that. Alright, so let's check out the material that we're working with and start out on the first bases. So first I grabbed all the stuff I had lying around, from cork to rocks, sand, asphalt paste, rough terrain paste, dark earth paste, cork bark, tufts, pigments, more rocks, and also these wonderful things that look like fallen leaves, and some barbed wire, because it's a grimdark future, so why not put some barbed wire on there. I don't want empty, boring bases, so I grabbed my trusty box of greebles. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is either fantasy or sci-fi. There's a lot of 3D printed stuff in it, but I will find a lot of cool stuff in there to build my bases. I was experimenting around a bit, finding good ways to present the minis on the base, and I decided against him jumping off a stair. That seemed a bit stupid, right? So I took a rock. And I found a lot of broken concrete slabs, and this kind of reminded me of one of the pictures I saw while doing the Google search. So I decided to put a lot of them onto the bases, because maybe someone will recognize it. I don't know, they just look cool. Yes, a rock is much better than some stairs. This will be fun. This base will look great. This cork is a really good foundation for something that looks like a street. And then I just scratched around a bit, making some holes to make it look old and rugged and rough. And then I started gluing in some bits like pipes and other stuff. And if you add a second layer, you get a pretty solid start for a base. I'm really sorry for being kind of ignorant and not getting all these Space Marine names down just yet. I promise you it will get better once I build this army. But for this Redemptor Dreadnought, I have something really special in mind. I will try to build like a wall around this base, so if I put him in there, once everything is painted, I can fill it up with resin, so this will be epic. He will be standing in a huge puddle of water. And for that, I covered most of the rim in basing glue and then just dipped it into a large amount of basing material, mostly from Geek Gaming Scenics or Army Painter. And when that's done, I will try to cover the insides with some paste, so I can basically seal off the whole rim, and hopefully the resin won't leak afterwards. But we won't be getting to see this, because I first need to paint the bases and I need to paint the mini, and when that is all done, I will show you in a future video how I do the resin pour. Do you know what I absolutely hate? Flying bases. I mean, it's a kind of clear plastic thingy that goes up the backpack of the miniature, and they're just hovering in mid-air, and they look so strange. Let's do something about that, hey? Luckily I found some greebles that were a bit taller than the rest, and I decided, yeah, well, they won't be looking like flying that much, so why don't I make it look like they are jumping over these huge piles of concrete and rubble. Basically, I just attach the feet to parts of the greebles and it makes them look like they're jumping over it. It's quite fine. And to blend this all together, again, just basing glue and some good old rubble and sand stuff. I mean, yeah, they look kind of nice now, but it's all a little bit, how do I put it, tacked on, thrown together. It's time to blend it all together with some texture paste. I did not show you how I made every single base, but it was basically putting on greebles and now I'm putting on paste. I'm using an old brush for this that is basically going to be thrown away later on, and then you just grab your base and you put on the paste and it will dry nicely and blend all the edges together. You need to be a little bit careful that you don't cover all the stuff you glued on, because this is really thick stuff, and don't bother too much keeping it off the rim. I found that just letting it dry and scraping it off is much more hassle-free than trying to swipe it all off the base rim. That's kind of annoying and everything is sticky and it isn't that much fun. So just let it dry and then later on scrape off the base rim. By the way, the caps on these pots, they don't really seal that well. So you are getting kind of dried out texture paste quite easily, quite fast. So I put them in foil, that's a bit better, they don't dry out that fast. To get some more variety in, I used this asphalt paste on some other bases, and it is quite nice, but I don't know how to use it properly, I guess. Maybe you need to smooth it out more, maybe you need to apply it thinner with a spatula, I don't quite know. I will test some more stuff, but for now it looks fine, like old rough asphalt, I guess. But to make streets with it, they actually look much better now that they are bound together with the texture paste, and it doesn't look so tacked on right now. So it's time to prime them in a gray and give them a nice dry brush. I prefer artist white for a dry brush, and I want smooth and easy application, no hard edges, so I'm using this nice little makeup brush. A small sponge and a drop of water go a long way when you're dry brushing, because you're not actually dry brushing, you are more like removing paint. So some moisture on the brush is necessary for a smooth application. I also highly recommend to rub off excess paint on a texture palette like this, or at least on cardboard, but not on paper towel, because it will suck all the moisture from your paintbrush. And what I want to achieve with the dry brushing is just highlights on the raised edges. So I'll swipe my brush left and right, top to bottom, all over the base, and try to catch all the raised edges to highlight them. And that works pretty well because there's a lot of texture on those bases. For stuff like rocks, for example, I tend to leave a little bit more paint in the brush, so it's not just the edges, but some of the smaller surface areas also get a little bit of highlight. And actually this looks really nice when you do it right. So I picked out a few colors to get some tones underneath and some color variation. First of all, for the metals and the verdigris and the rust on them, and of course some mud, moss and all the stuff that's growing there. The metal is the first part that I start with. Pipes are coming up from the ground, there's metal in the concrete, and I kind of want to blend it into the environment. So I'm painting the metal first and rust and verdigris second, so I can blend it in with all the other stuff that I'm doing to the bases. Since they will be pretty rusty later on, I'm starting with all the parts that I want to be steel or silver. I then follow up with all the stuff that needs to be copper, and I thin down the paint quite a bit, and I don't care that much about coverage because it will be grimy and dirty later on anyway. I like to share my favorite rust recipe with you. First, I go over all the parts that needs to be rusty with the Vallejo dark rust. And then I take the lighter orange rust and blend it all together. And after it dried, it makes up for a really realistic rust effect. The verdigris effect color from Vallejo is also fine if you thin it down with water quite a lot, because then it tends to go into all the cracks and crevices and leaves a nice staining on all the metal parts that you covered with. And I think it looks quite realistic. You could go on and blend it further with a wet brush, but for these bases I'm quite fine with how it flows around. So the metals are in, and now it's time for the wood parts. There are a few on those bases, not much, but I want to paint them separately. And of course I'm going to stipple in browns, greens, more grays, and I'm also laying down the street markings I mentioned earlier. I'm being quite rough with this step because later on we will do a second dry brush, there will be a wash going over it, and it will all blend together pretty nice. I have to mention that I use really thinned down paint, so it's more like a wash or glaze consistency and not real fully opaque, so I still get some of these raised highlights that we dry brushed in early on. The reason that I only show you the bigger bases here is quite simple. They are bigger and it's easier to see all the stuff that I'm doing here, so of course I'm using the bigger bases. But I'm doing all the same stuff to the smaller bases as well. And I may have changed the color of the street markings to yellow because I want to stick them out a bit more underneath all that grime and rubble and stuff. White street markings wouldn't be so visible, so I decided to make them yellow. Maybe Grimsby decided to make yellow street markings in the future, like 38,000 years in the future. Who knows? But for this I just mixed the yellow and I put in some fluorescent yellow to make it pop. And since I'm doing so much more stuff to these bases, you wouldn't be able to see it. They look quite fine right now, but the concrete part and the tarmac part underneath are a bit lost to all that stippling. So the best part is to continue stippling and bring some of that grey tones back. Maybe even dry brush some of it back onto the concrete. On this base you can quite clearly see why we're doing that, because everything looks tacked on and it needs to be blended together. And I don't want to lose a lot of highlights while blending it together, so I'm dry brushing on it and stippling some more grey on it. Of course, for the dry brush I get back the makeup brush and I load it quite a lot with paint, not white this time but grey, and I get over all the details just to get some highlights back. I think it's a good idea to take a look at the bases and how they're looking right now. Yeah, they are fine. You could slap a black base rim on and they would be good to go, but I kind of want to take this some steps further. Before you shoot me guys, you can do the next step with a simple wash. You can make your own wash, you can use a pre-made wash. Doesn't even matter what kind of wash you're using, but I want to do oils. I know guys, oils are scary, well, until they aren't. You can test them out, you can always remove them, it's a joy to work with, but you could use streaking grime also. It works basically the same. Just remember, don't screw up your good brushes with oils and enamels. Oil washes are no magic, just watch out a bit for your health. In this case I used some odorless thinner, spaceship grime, one of my favorite oil colors, and some black, and I just mixed it all together to make an oil wash. And actually quite thin oil wash, because in this case I want more shadows and keep all the raised areas quite unstained, and I don't want to rub all of it off with a sponge later. But I have to admit, this step is super scary because you cover all your hard work under a layer of black grayish paint. It scares me every time. I know how oils work and how easy it is to remove it later on. It's still scary. And this is how they look all oiled up. And when you're done with the last base, you can pretty much go back to the first base and start removing all the oils. There are basically two ways to go about with oils. First version would be to varnish that stuff and to easily remove the oils from the surface. In this case, I want to blend with the oils, so I don't use a varnish, and I want the oil layer to really work into the acrylic layer, so I let it sit for around 30 minutes before I start wiping stuff off. I use just dry makeup sponges to get all the stuff off that I wanted off the base, and if there are any spaces or anything on your Mini that is covered too much and it wouldn't budge, it wouldn't move off, you can always use some odorless thinner to remove it completely again. Oils are really easy and nice to work with. Alright guys, we are nearly there, but I'm doing one more step. I want to combine the wet looking stuff with some dry looking textures, so I'm adding pigments. You could skip the step, or you could do it later when the miniature is on top of that base. There are a lot of ways to work with pigments. You could use your pigment binder and mix it all together, put them on. You put your pigments on first, add your binder later. Some people do it with isopropyl alcohol. Some people just stipple them on and seal them in later on with a varnish. There's a lot of way to work with pigments. But when they are dry on the base, they look really dry, and that's the effect I'm going for. There are some parts that look quite, let's say, wet with all the rusty stuff and all the verdigris on the pipes, but I want some dry spots too, so I'm using pigments. And after showing you how it looks when I put it on with a pigment binder, of course I'm showing you how it looks if I put it on just plainly dry. It's a big difference, and you kind of need to seal them in because they would fall off, or at least some of it can fall off if it's not sealed in properly. Don't forget to add a black base rim, and of course I want to seal it all in, and for that I'm using a matte varnish. My normal workflow would be some Vallejo matte varnish with the airbrush, but this is a bit much for 48 bases, so I'm falling back on this Army Painter anti-shine, which is quite alright. Now that all our hard work is sealed in properly, I think it's time for the last step. So we're adding bushes, tufts and some fallen leaves to make them look really lived in, really authentic, and a wonderful base for this wonderful army. Normally tufts have some adhesive under them, but I always put down a drop of super glue so it really sticks down nice. And when you put them down, look for some places where some soil could have gathered, like near rocks or in a tear that is in the open street, something where soil is so the plant could actually grow. Basing glue dries clear, and it could look a little bit wet, but this is perfect for all those leaves because there's always moisture when there's leaves on the ground, so it will look perfect once it dried. I tend to press them down with a brush and then just slap the rest off. Just a light little slap and they're gone. Leave the rest for drying. And the barbed wire, yeah, you guessed it. Just put down a drop of super glue, put the barbed wire down where it could have actually caught between rocks or concrete slabs just lying around there. Make it a little bit believable. And let's just hope that everything I've done here will be able to hold on some resin when I painted this big beast of a miniature and put it in there. I really want to try the resin pour once this mini is painted. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting all those pesky buttons down below, like, comment, subscribe. It all helps out a bunch. And if you want, join me over on the Discord. We have a lot of cool people there, a lot of inspiration going on, a lot of nice people. You will feel right at home there. But without further ado, let's take a look at them. First of all, a huge thank you to my patrons. I am so happy that you guys support me in this little hobby stuff that I do. And don't forget, all this that I'm doing right now has sponsors. First of all, my friendly local gaming store Kutami, who came in with the whole Augustus box that is already built and prepared. Check out the last video. RFD Hobby sending in his Marines which literally went through fire, and this is an amazing gift, and they are already also prepared and ready for the next video. And of course, Mr. Zorg over on Instagram, over on the Discord, who donated a lot of cash so I could buy in some cool new stuff for this army too. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I really hope to see you soon here on The Bear and the Brush. Bye guys.